welcome Dr. Jennifer Roback Morse. You were here this week taping with Johnette, and I just wanted to ask you on our podcast here, you mentioned to me about these 5 myths of the gay myths that we're told in our culture. And the first one is sexual orientation is an easily measured scientific concept. You have that on your website.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, so first off, Father Mark, thanks for having me, on your show, and thanks to introducing me to your listeners and stuff. So I'm happy to talk to y'all. We created a report called Refuting the Top 5 Gay Myths. And I start that out by saying, look, the big picture myth that they're aiming at is they want to be able to say that sexual orientation is an inborn, immutable trait, because that's the language that the Supreme Court and the law uses to talk about discrimination and what is unlawful to discriminate against. So, and as you know, our anti-discrimination law in the United States was written principally and originally to help African Americans who descended from slaves and trying to right the wrong and, deal with all the problems that have been created with that. And so one of the language that the court came up with is that race is an inborn, immutable trait. And if you're treating people differently on the basis of an inborn, immutable trait, that's unlawful. If they behave differently from each other, if people behave differently, you can treat behavior differently. If people's work performance or job qualifications are different, you can treat people differently on those bases. But if it's simply an inborn, immutable trait, you're not allowed to discriminate on that. Right. And so the strategy of the gay lobby has been to convince everybody that sexual orientation is like race, that it's an inborn, immutable trait. And you may have heard the phrase, gay is the new black. And, what the science shows and what common sense shows, if you really start to analyze it, is that gay is nothing like black, Right. And so the thing that we call the first myth of that sexual orientation is an easily observable, measurable scientific concept, that's kind of the opening question. What are we even talking about here? And when you really start thinking about it, sexual orientation is a constellation of feelings and thoughts and behaviors and self-identification and what meaning to assign the feelings. There's a whole bunch of things that go into it, and you find this out when people start asking questions that are scientific in nature. They're trying to measure something. Years ago, Alfred Kinsey, in his first report on human sexuality and the human male, he claimed that 10% of the population was gay, of the male population in the United States. This is in the 40s. He made this claim, and a bunch of statisticians said that really doesn't sound right, and started asking questions. Well, they had a whole battery of questions. Are you sexually attracted? Who are you primarily sexually attracted to? Who have you ever done it with? Who have you ever done it with in the last 5 years? Have you ever done it exclusively with the opposite sex, same-sex person since puberty? All of these different aspects of it. And of course, they came up with a figure nowhere near 10%. Kinsey was making stuff up, which I think everybody knew that at some point. But this is in the 1990s that these sociologists at the University of Chicago started asking these questions. And, not only was Kinsey's 10% number too big, but these different measures that you have of self-identification, behavior, feelings, they don't all line up. So not every, person might say, I'm gay, but they don't answer yes to all the other questions. So and now that's a big area of study. That's still an open area of study, Father Mark. There are guys who talk about incongruence of the gay identity, or they'll talk about people being mostly heterosexual or mostly homosexual, because there's fuzzy edges around this concept, So nothing like race. Gay is nothing like race.
Well, I remember back in the 80s, I forgot if it was the CDF or the USCCB had a document. It's probably the CDF, but it made it clear this is not equated to race, and you've heard like some African Americans speak out against it.
Oh, they've hated it.
Yeah,
they hate it. It makes them mad.
Yeah,
I know many people. I shouldn't say everybody agrees with that, but a lot of Black people in America are deeply resent it. Yeah.
And to me, it was just like, well, one, we're talking about behavior,
That's the point.
Yeah, it's like
That's a point.
this isn't like physical appearance, this is behavior. And then like I think that's a great point too with the fuzzy edges to it, and because sometimes I've heard like the Catholic pro-gay lifestyle speakers, it almost like they want to get away from the same-sex attraction part of it. It's like they don't want to say that's at the heart of it. It's like some kind of bigger thing. I don't know if it's like they see it as some kind of license or overturning of values of normative values of sexuality, or something. It's like this big broad badge that covers a lot of stuff that I said, we are talking about people attracted to people of the same sex, right? That's what homosexuality is.
Well, and I've become aware recently that there's a lot of dispute within the broad coalition of people who are same-sex attracted who are also Christian,
Right.
and they have different ways of talking about themselves. And some are all 100% on board with the Catholic Catechism that this is not your identity.
Right.
And I think that's the crucial issue, honestly, Father Mark, that there are some people who say, I'm a Christian and I'm gay, and the others want to say, yes, you experience same-sex attraction, but gay is not your identity.
Right.
That's the point of dispute, I think,
Yeah.
largely. And the Catholic Church is very clear that that's not your identity. That's a personality trait, maybe a deep-seated personality trait, but it's not your ultimate identity.
Right. And that's the other thing. If you want to make it more than just some kind of attraction, it's like you might have stereotypical like gay attributes of personality, like sensitivity, artistic ability, or whatever. But then you meet people that aren't that way at all. Right?
Exactly.
So I remember Father John Harvey, founder of Courage, when I was in seminary, he came and spoke. And I remember that was the one point I remember he made. He said, we speak of same-sex attracted persons. We don't say this is an identity.
Right.
You have you're a human person that has this attraction, right? And it's like, but I guess the compassion part is some people's experience of it. They feel like they were born this way, or they feel like it is an identity. But I feel like that's where the gospel comes in. It says your identity is a child of God, and you don't have to act on this. You have freedom that by God's grace, you don't have to give in to this, and to be given in a compassionate way.
And that's where the next myth comes in. That we've been told people are born gay.
Right. Right.
And there's literally no scientific evidence for that claim whatsoever.
Right.
I mean, literally zero.
Right.
The human genome has been thoroughly studied. There's no gay gene. There's no gay complex of genes. You can't look at somebody's genetic code and say that guy's going to be gay.
Right.
That's not how it is. And when you think of it as a constellation of behaviors, thoughts, feelings, identification, all of that, it'd be astonishing if it was genetic. Right?
Right.
Because it's just not how people work, So you might have a genetic predisposition to some of those traits. Maybe you do.
Right.
Like a person might have a genetic predisposition to schizophrenia that may or may not ever manifest.
Yeah.
Right? And alcoholism. And, there are a lot of different that and what they have in common is that they're complex behavioral patterns that also have an environmental component. So people are under stress, certain things are going to be more likely to manifest and stuff like that. So between the genetic studies and the studies of identical twins, there's really nothing left of the claim that people are born gay. And then that leads to the next point: can you change? And the big myth is nobody can change. And you're born that way. That's who you are. That's your real identity. Your best hope in life is to embrace that and be your true self. That kind of thing. And I was talking with Johnette about this. We at the Ruth Institute, we're now doing we've got a whole series of interviews that I've done with people who have made this journey away from an LGBT identity, and I've also interviewed therapists and, other kind of social scientists and stuff like that. And these people are blowing me away with what they're telling me, I mean, this one guy told me, this is a guy who thought of himself as gay, was same-sex attracted, had all these feelings. And he can tell you the exact minute he started feeling it. He was 8 years old, and he was with a bunch of other boys, and they saw gay pornography. And it imprinted on him, upset him terribly. Never talked to anybody about it, never told anybody about it. And when he was in his 20s, he started going to therapy. And he said, for 2 years, all that counselor did was let me talk. He just let me talk. Because he was doing all this stuff in his mind by himself, And that's an area where the church probably could be doing a better job, is making it easier for people to share that type of experience, so that, because he was freaked out, didn't want to tell his parents, all this kind of stuff, right? But
I know, I wonder that sometimes I've thought about, I mean, they have churches have small groups. I know there's a big one in Texas. We interviewed a layman there is running the small groups program, because the mega churches, right, they live and breathe on small groups, and they talk about is generating this great vitality. But yeah, it seems like the Catholic Church could do that better, to we could use that word, accompany people and let them talk and not feel like you join the human race. We all have our brokenness, we all have our struggles, and I know the compassion piece is the same-sex attraction. A person might be feeling, I'm going to have to live alone. I can't get married. I can't. And so, we have to have great compassion and charity towards that. But yeah, I think the sharing component, we could do better. And I mean, it's a hard thing to keep things, in the confession, you have this absolute seal of confession. That's such a blessing, to people to repent of sins and confess things, to be honest. But yeah, if there's something we could do better in the church to help people be able to talk about these things.
Right. Now, there's the whole realm outside confession. Where people can be talking and sharing and stuff like that. Another this is something a therapist told me. She was doing a study. She is both a clinician and a researcher kind of person. And she's doing a study of guys, about 75 guys who've been to a clinic that was there to help people deal with unwanted same-sex attraction and the problems that arise from it. Okay. And this particular clinic, they don't say, we're going to get rid of your same-sex attraction. They say, we're going to help you process your early childhood traumas and issues, whatever they may be. But a lot of the guys come with this complaint, this presenting complaint. And the purpose of her study was to find out, is this therapy helping? What's going on? Let's track it a little bit. So this is a self-selected bunch of men, 75 men who are motivated, who want change in their lives. Many of them religious. They want their life to match up with their religious values. They aspire to getting married. They want to get married. They want to have a normal family life, and so they're trying to get their thoughts and feelings aligned with those values, right? So they surveyed them, and of course they were asking, over the 6 or 9 months or however long they were in therapy, did you have any lessening of your same-sex attraction, and so on and so forth. And some of them did. Not all of them did, but some of them did. The striking thing to her was that almost all of them felt better. Right. So even if they didn't experience a lessening of same-sex attraction, that therapeutic process was not hurting them. The therapeutic process was helping them. And in fact, she described to me this instrument that I guess is a thing in psychology. I don't know. I have to take her word for it. But they have something that a person might take every time they go to the therapist, just kind of check in, like a half dozen questions. Sounds like to me, like a half dozen questions or something. To make sure people aren't going off the rails, getting suicidal or something like that. And she said analyzing people's answers to these questionnaires is that they started feeling better very quickly. Within a few sessions, they were feeling better. And her thought about that was that the reason they're feeling better is that this therapeutic process gave them hope. Instead of feeling like, okay, you have these feelings, you're stuck with them for the rest of your life, and that's going to be the center of your life for the rest of your life. No, that need not be the case. They felt, by golly, they felt better knowing they had some options, So that, that's the kind of stuff that we that the Ruth Institute, we try to find this type of stuff and give people a bigger picture of some of these issues, because if you just listen to the mainstream media, you would think anybody who goes for therapy is certainly doing themselves harm. They're
Yeah.
homophobic, they hate their true selves,
Yeah.
kind of thing. And that's not the case.
And there's been these successful, I was going to say attempts, but to outlaw some of these therapies or
Yes.
repair. But a number have been overturned, right? I remember reading this a couple of years ago, but some of the people that practice reparative therapy, I remember hearing the Nicolosi group talk about how they were able to overturn these.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know where the state is now?
Different things are going differently in different states,
Mm,
as you may imagine.
yeah.
So in Florida, there were a couple of municipal bans on counseling therapy, and those were overturned.
Mm.
As a matter of fact, I interviewed the therapist who was the plaintiff,
Oh,
and he told
wow.
me all about it and everything. And one of the things that came out of the evidence presented in those cases was just how bad the evidence is.
Yeah.
Right. In other words, the people who are claiming that this is harmful to you, their evidence is garbage. I mean, literally, it's
Yeah.
junk science. And
Yeah.
my colleague, Father Paul Sullins, is a sociologist. I don't know if you've heard of Father
Mm-hmm.
Sullins and his work. We're very proud of him at the Ruth Institute. He's done a series of studies on this question of rather than interviewing people the way a therapist might, he's looking
Yeah.
at the statistics of people reporting, yes, I went for this kind of therapy, here's what happened to me,
Right.
that kind of thing. And so he's proven pretty clearly that the so-called link between being suicidal and having gone to therapy is completely bogus.
Right.
Completely bogus.
And you were saying this study, people came out with more hope, right?
Yeah,
Your
yeah.
friend.
This little study, okay, so that's
Yeah.
75 people, and
Right.
nobody claims that's representative.
Right.
And this
Right.
is one of the things that really irritates the heck out of me. Junk science bugs me, okay?
Yeah. Right.
There are two big ways that they do junk science in this area, and people should listen up, because you should have your antenna up whenever you hear a study like this, y'all. Okay, there are two things to watch out for. Number one, who did they put in the sample? Who are they sampling, okay? So almost all of these studies basically interview a sample of people who currently identify themselves as LGBT people, and they ask them about their experience with therapy counseling.
Yeah.
Okay, well, now what's the problem with that? If they were really helped by the therapy and they no longer identify as LGBT, they're not going to be in the survey. It would be like saying marriage counseling causes divorce based only on a sample of divorced people.
Right. Right.
You don't even include the people who are helped. And then the other big problem with a lot of these studies is they look at your going to therapy over the course of your lifetime. Did you ever go at any time? Have you ever been suicidal at any time over the course of the lifetime? They don't distinguish between your suicidality or your distress before the therapy or after the therapy. So if you want to claim that the therapy caused the distress, it should be distress that took place after the therapy, right? And so Father Sullins, basically one of the landmark studies in this area, he just took it apart. And they bitched and moaned and whined at him a little bit, but basically he's right. That the people who were in distress and suicidal chose to go to therapy to get help. Right? The people who are most upset, who have the biggest problems, they're going to choose to go to therapy. And so if you just look at what they do over the course of their lifetime, of course you're going to see kids who, had a terrible life. They're going to be more suicidal, but that doesn't prove the therapy caused it, So.
And I remember hearing one of the Nicolosi group talk about, like, they don't even have to directly address the same-sex attraction. They're looking at, like, their connection to mom and dad and those kind of experiences, that they're working on that we all, if you have same-sex attraction or not, we probably all have some wounding from family of origin where we didn't get affirmed or connected in some way, that we could all look at that stuff.
Right. Yeah, and that's how Dr. Nicolosi, Sr. and Jr., I think, describe what they do. They're looking at family dynamics. They're looking, they and others who work in this area, they're looking at childhood trauma and helping people process that. And one thing I heard, this is something I heard from a courage priest, okay? He said to me that often it's not the courage guy or the same-sex attracted person who is so adamant. It's their parents. The parents of the gay man are absolutely convinced that he was born gay.
Oh.
And what the priest said was, it's easier for them to think that than to think that something they did may have disrupted his psyche.
Right. Right.
So, well, that's something to think about, you know.
Yeah. And I remember one time Father Benedict Rochelle was giving us a retreat early on in our community. He was very helpful to us and would give us retreats and stuff. And he was talking to us about celibacy, and he said, you get on a subway in New York City, a lot of people in there are having sex in their lives. Does that make them unbelievably happy or fulfilled or whatever? He was trying to encourage us along celibacy. But I think, too, it's like a lot of people have an instability in their sex, especially men. It's like men have a more unstable, seated attraction template in some ways. He get kind of weird in some ways, that a lot of healing needs to take place in different areas. But some reason, the same-sex attraction area is supposed to be like untouchable. It's like,
yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of perversions out there, and many people have a cross to bear and work on this and fighting. The Catechism describes as a battle for chastity, but I never thought about like the happiness and the hope component, because just especially the person of the church comes and says, this is your identity, which we have powerful voices out there doing that, it can steal their hope.
That's the point. Yeah. I think that's right. I think that's right.
It's like we're not given the full gospel, but everybody's got a right to the full gospel.
Yeah.
We can't put a certain group of people and say, no, this isn't for you.
Right. By what right would we do that?
Yeah.
Do you know, you're the theologian. You straighten me out if this is not correct. But it almost sounds like a kind of secular Calvinism, like a double predestination. Yeah. This is your fate.
Yeah.
But it's Calvinism without grace.
Right.
I mean, the secular version has no grace in it, which is really spooky.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. Secular world has no grace, no mercy, no forgiveness. And all this stuff too. I think sometimes of Mother Angelica, who, people would say she was tough and all this, but I just remember her dealing with people on the phones and stuff on her show, her live show, and she just had such a heart for people in whatever struggle.
Right.
I mean, she could be tough, lay down the law, say this is what the church teaches, but when she comes across a person that has a personal struggle, it's like the mother in her just would come out, and try to help people. And not just tell them keep going. I think part of it is in our culture is like, hey, you don't tell me what to do with my sex life, I won't tell you what to do with yours. And they almost celebrate if somebody is kind of more out there.
It's true.
It gives me a license, right?
You are. I think that's really true. Yeah. And I think that's a big part of the, what do I want to say, kind of the dynamic, the engine that keeps the sexual revolution going.
Right.
It's like, I'll overlook your garbage if you overlook my garbage. And it's almost like if you're conscious of sexual sin, and somebody's saying to you, well, here, sign this petition against gay marriage. We want man-woman marriage. Will you sign our petition?
Right.
If the person has sexual sin in their own life, they're like they're not going to tell you why they're not going to sign your petition.
Right.
But they don't. But they don't.
Yeah.
It's like a mutual pact to absolve each other.
Right.
Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I saw that some of the Hollywood celebrities too. Like sometimes, like the older women celebrities seem to be these big advocates, and I'm like wondering why are you so invested in this? Some have been married a bunch of times, and that's the feeling you get.
Yeah.
I mean, they can be very kind and compassionate. You can see that, especially like the women, but at the same time, you feel like it's almost like a license that you're
correct.
Yeah,
I think there's a lot to that. Another aspect of it, this is a different aspect of the same thing. I think the guilty conscience problem is a huge problem.
Yeah.
Right. So we are hurting people, Father Mark, but understand the nature of the hurt. We're pricking their conscience.
Right.
And that is really hurtful. They don't like it.
Yeah.
But we're not wrong.
Right.
You know, and
Right.
so somehow dealing with the guilty conscience problem. One of the ways that I sometimes try to do it is to try to let people off the hook a little bit at the beginning. So I have this talk that I do.
Mm-hmm.
It's called Boldly Defending Traditional Christian Sexual
Mm-hmm.
Ethics, okay? And I start with an image of a hurricane, of
Mm-hmm.
which we had a hurricane. We had 2 hurricanes in Lake
Like
Charles in
yeah.
2020. I don't know if you remember that,
Yeah.
but,
Yeah.
you know, it was crazy. And basically I started with, you know, if one house in the neighborhood is run down, you think, what's wrong with these people?
Mm-hmm.
But if everybody's wiped out, you go,
Mm-hmm.
wait a minute, what happened here?
Mm-hmm.
Something big happened. Well, the sexual revolution is like a hurricane and it's destroyed everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And so now you don't feel like, what's wrong with these people? You know, you might,
Right.
you know, in the 60s or some 50s or something, you might have, they got divorced. That's not great, you know, whatever. But now it's like
Yeah.
everybody's in that boat, you know.
Yeah.
And so in that way, there is a way in which we do owe ourselves a little bit of compassion
Yeah.
because we're under, I would say, unprecedented pressure to do the
Right.
wrong thing. We have
Right.
basically no social structures that guide kids down the right path, you
Yeah.
know.
Right.
And so it's not surprising that people are, you know, driving off the cliff.
Right.
You know, no guardrails on the cliff, no brakes in the car. Not a good situation, you know.
And I think too, like our elderly generation can help so much. I remember just growing up, you know, my grandparents were born like 1915, 16. They lived through the Depression, World War II and stuff. And it seemed like they always had like cultural norms. You don't do this. You can't do that. Or just like what to do on dates or something, or have accountability and stuff. And as a kid, I always just thought, oh, you guys are completely overreacting. You just don't get it or whatever. But I remember some things like people in the family or something messed up, and they could come down on people, but also sometimes there was like an understanding. It's like because they had lived life and they had their own wounds, their own sins. I was surprised sometimes at the compassion they would feel for like a family struggling with something, or the
Mm-hmm.
guy sometimes struggling with drinking or something like
Mm-hmm.
that. And I think like our culture is so, in some sense, it tries to be youthful all the time, and it doesn't have that wisdom. Sometimes, like the older generation, I think could have that powerful role just to talk about mercy and say, I've had my mistakes in life and stuff, but let's work on this. Let's move
Mm-hmm.
forward, and have some compassion. It just seems like the culture and embracing this sexual license, as people suffer from it, it's just letting people,
Yes. Yeah.
it just
They
fall
do
off the
nothing to
side.
help.
Yeah,
They do
yeah,
nothing to help. Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
that's really true. And in
yeah.
a way, the counseling bans are a way of blocking the exits.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, okay, you've told everybody they can do whatever they want. I mean, the basic message of the sexual revolution is you can do anything you want and nothing
Right,
bad will happen. You know,
right, right.
which is intrinsically
Yeah,
seductive. Like
yeah,
everybody
right,
wants to believe that, right?
right.
Well, now something bad happens. Your values and your feelings don't line up, and I feel cruddy, and I don't like
Mm-hmm.
what I did, and I don't like the way I was treated, and I don't want to be part of this anymore.
Yeah.
Too bad. Too bad. You're on the reservation, And the same thing with the crisis pregnancy centers. Think about that.
Yeah.
Think about the audacity of attacking ladies who give away free diapers.
Yeah.
I mean, what the heck is going, I mean, it's yeah, they're trying to help, and they accuse us of not caring about anybody,
Mm-hmm.
and yet the people they're attacking are the ones who actually are knocking themselves out to help.
Right, right.
So yeah, the sexual revolution doesn't have any mercy in it. You go with the program and you accept the broken heart, and
Yeah,
if you regret your abortion, you shut up.
right,
You shut up
right,
because you
right,
don't want to give those nasty pro-life people any
right,
ammunition. So
right,
you sit down and shut up because
right.
that's the price you pay for your right to
Yeah,
choose.
yeah,
These a lot of these women are so angry.
yeah.
They're
We
really wounded.
and we hear some of those witnesses. Like I was out for the Walk for Life in San Francisco, and I heard a couple of conversion stories of like the volunteers who've been doing it for 20 years now, that they've had some jump ship from the pro-choice side because of the joy, the happiness, and they saw the ugliness of their side.
Yeah.
Like the argument like you just made, like,
Yeah.
you shut up. It's like, how's that, if you just take a step back and look at, this angry person yelling this at a person maybe hurting or something, it's like, who wants to be part of that?
Right. Right.
You got the other side offering to help and having some attractiveness about the peace and joy the Christian message gives. So, and I know I ask you this every year, but it's like, I always wonder, how did we get here? And I just heard these two theologians talking about this on a podcast, but they were talking about this breakdown in the teaching of conscience. Like, how did we get to the sexual revolution?
Oh.
And they cited like Karl Rahner as heading this up about, really seeding conscience as this decision we make, like kind of abstracting it from law, like divorcing it from law as guiding us. It's like emphasizing the part that is, and it is, right? The Catholic understanding that conscience is a personal judgment about a concrete act in front of us, but we have to form the conscience. And that's what they were getting away from. It's like just emphasizing you have to obey your conscience, live by your conscience. So if this is telling you this is fine, then it must be fine. But it's divorced from law and tradition, understanding of what the gospel teaches. And it seemed like that's definitely a necessary component. If you're going to overturn everything in the 60s, right, you have to overemphasize that aspect of conscience.
Well, it's a kind of, if you think about it, isn't it, what's the word? It's a kind of antinomian position. We don't really need any law.
Right.
Because if you let everybody be the judge in their own case, of course you will have no law very quickly, because everyone will let themselves off the hook. Right.
Yeah. And somehow, law is opposed to freedom and stuff. But the Catholic teaching is that if we live, if we get married, stay married, have kids, it live this natural law that, it brings a happiness and a fulfillment.
Right.
Not to say it's not hard.
Right.
But those sacrifices is the heart of true love, right? To make these sacrifices.
Right. And having an accurate picture of that natural law and how it works and fits together, that's what will help you get over those rough spots where it would be it would be easier to just cheat.
Right.
My conscience tells me that this is perfectly okay. So there, you got to get over that. You got to have something to help you get over that, right? So you have to have thought it through ahead of time,
right?
And be committed. And be in some way accountable, and you can't do it all yourself. Right. I'm to be honest, I'm a little weirded out and worried about the Catholic position on conscience. I can't figure it out, I can't figure out exactly what authority it has, or where that authority ranks in terms of other authorities and stuff. We're in a very interesting time right now in the life of the church, don't you think? I mean,
we definitely. We always have to obey the conscience, but we also have a solemn duty. We have to form the conscience. So we have to, accept the teachings of the church, be guided by the church and guided by the natural law and stuff. So that, conscience is a participation in God's eternal law through reason, that I can know this natural law through reason, but most of us need help to get a full picture of it, right?
Right.
And you have to have some humility there.
Right.
And it doesn't help when you got intellectuals running around saying the opposite, and of course our culture is doing that constantly and doing it, dressing it up to look attractive.
So what did these theologians have to say about the role of conscience? Was it directly germane to what we're talking about here? Or?
Well, I think they were just celebrating, well, if your conscience says you can use contraception, in these few isolated cases, like Lambeth Conference in the 1920s for the Anglican Church, it begins by saying, okay, in a few cases, particular situations, a person's conscience might say they can do this. Mary Eberstadt points this out in her book. Fast forward 30 years, they're promoting it.
Right.
And it's like, it seems like we're not convinced, it seems to me, that law, the connection between law, truth, and freedom, that freedom is we have this ought to do the good. We need to, it's a power to do the good
Right.
in our life.
Right.
When we do that, we grow in freedom.
Right.
And I
Authentic
think,
freedom. Yeah.
yeah, it's like, and I think with America too, and I love America, and I grew up in Huntsville, Alabama, which is this high tech center, and you had a lot of people that would come there and be smart, have an idea, like a big tech idea or technological idea for advancement of whatever technology, and it and they would sell it. They maybe start a company, sell their company, retires a millionaire, or whatever. I saw a lot of success stories like that. That you could come and do that in America. And America loves freedom, and just right from the word go,
Yeah.
people were coming over here to this new country, unlimited resources, and all these men were coming. They need to import wives just to marry.
Yeah, right.
I even heard a feminist say this one time. She was a historian. She was talking about the American Revolution and stuff and the founding of the country. And this is on NPR. And the guy asked her, said, what was women's biggest contribution? And she said, to make the men settle down, to get married.
Yeah, no, that's true. I'm sure that's true. Not to mention the 10 kids that they all had,
But yeah, it's like this country is resource, and it's just like wide open from the beginning. We champion freedom, but what we've discovered and what our history is that we divorce that freedom from truth and law. It just becomes license, it becomes chaos, and it becomes an inhumane culture.
Right. And it seems to me, we're also big on equality, right? And equality has been distorted and corrupted, and turned into something that's impossible and, kind of crazy. But equality and freedom and individualism, all of those things that have kind of run amok in America, they all have proper Christian understandings,
right.
And it seems to me that that would be a helpful contribution for Christian thinkers to help people, settle down, as you say, get you men to settle down. You're running crazy with these ideas. They're good ideas, but come on, but there are proper limits to it,
Yeah. And I remember you made a point to me one year too that I thought was great. You said, because I think maybe I heard it on your podcast or something, but it was like, I kept wondering, like when I was growing up, Michael Jordan's marketing Air Jordans. He's literally worth $2 billion now. And they wanted him to be part of like a civil rights movement or whatever. And he said, well, Republicans buy shoes too. It's like, if you want to make money, you stay out of social positions and politics, right? Now it's like the opposite. I mean, big tech jumps into all these social issues.
Oh yeah. There's something new afoot now. Definitely. And I'm not sure where exactly it's coming from. I did interview a guy who actually is a big not a stockholder, shareholder, I guess is the right word. He's a financial manager. And he was challenging Chase Morgan Bank on the fact that they're discriminating against Christians in their banking, And so he did a shareholder resolution and the whole thing. So I interviewed him to get his take on what was going on. And I'm not sure I was satisfied with his answer. I don't completely know. I have a sense that there are a handful of really, really big players that are leaning on everybody and withholding capital if you don't toe the line. I don't know how true that is though, Father Mark. I wouldn't want to. But there's something they don't care about losing money. Bud Light does not care about losing money. Disney doesn't seem to care about all the money they're losing. They don't seem to care.
Right.
So they've got other priorities now for whatever reason. So
well, I remember it came up like it was a year ago. I forgot what that factor is, but there was some formula that would guide like capital investors, and one was like this social awareness.
Oh yeah.
What was that called? It
was there are a couple of different ones. I'm thinking DEI, diversity,
something like that.
Diversity, inclusion,
equity,
whatever. And then there's SDG. Anyway, I don't know what all the acronyms stand for, but definitely that's being monitored. There's no doubt about that.
So if you have like a quote unquote capitalist country, they have like all these investors, pools of money they can throw wherever. if you don't qualify because you don't line up with these their social values, you don't get as much investment money. So.
And one of the things that may be at work in the background of that, Father Mark, is that if you look at particularly women, but also men, the price of success is delayed childbearing. You know, so if you're going to go through college, you're going to get an advanced degree, you're going to become partner in the law firm, you got to put off having kids, you know, and you got to put yourself totally into the career. When you're 35 or 40, maybe you have 1 or 2 kids. That person is committed to the sexual revolution in a way, in a different way. And you're systematically selecting from the people who care more about their careers than about family. And that's who's rising to the top. So,
and I remember one time you made the point too that like big tech, you think of like Amazon, want us to buy products, right? And if they destabilize society, if you have smaller families, if you have a smaller safety net, or you more easily you can manipulate people into buying stuff. Somebody was just saying that, like, you know, in the past, I sound like I'm against capitalism. I'm not, but it's like, you know, you might be like going after natural resources. It might be doing it in a way that's ruthless or something, damaging the environment or whatever. Now the target is on humanity itself, like to manipulate humanity to buy more goods, right? And it seemed like if you don't have one thing, I guess if you're just by yourself, maybe in some sense you can buy more goods. Another sense, I think, though, that you're more easily to manipulate. You don't have people around you to kind of protect you from manipulation, to say, hey, maybe this isn't a good idea. You know, maybe you don't need to buy another big truck with huge tires or whatever it is. You know, just to live a more moderate life, you know, and because somebody's making money off of it, right? So,
but don't forget, one of the big pushes behind all of this is the population control people. You know, the people who think there are too many people have invested enormous amounts of money in convincing everybody that there are too many people. Now, if you thought about, and they think that they're saving, I don't know what they think they're doing, you know, honestly, because their position is incoherent, actually. I think what they mean is that there are too many people for our needs. We only need a few of you peons to keep us going, so we don't care. I mean, I don't think they're as smart as they think they are. I mean, none of them have really thought through depopulation, population decline, you know, which is now a thing that's going to be a real thing. And, you know, these geniuses haven't thought that through all the way, I don't think, you know. And people are starting to think it through, you know, but the guys who are really pumping all the money into it, they're true believers, you know. So.
I know you speak a lot on marriage, the importance of marriage, and it's the fundamental cell of society. So the family goes, so the world goes, and I even wrote a book. I was struck by that, about like how to find a mate or things to look for.
Oh yeah. My colleague and I, we have a book, 101 Tips for a Happier Marriage. Okay. And then we have 101 Tips for finding the right person, for marrying the right person. Yeah.
Can you throw out some of those tips? As a priest, I get asked that all the time.
Oh, do you really? Do you have a copy of our book? We have to send you the book, Father.
Okay.
There are different sections in that book. I mean, some of it is, you know, kind of common sense stuff of looking for somebody that you have things in common with. But some of it is really a way for us to present our information about some of the hazards in married life. One of which is, are you both from intact families? You know, if one of you's got divorce in your background, that's something to deal with. That doesn't mean the person's the wrong person for you, but it's something to think about. Yeah. We also have 2 chapters in there on cohabitation. You know, one of them is called, Are You Cohabiting? Don't. Yeah. If you aren't, don't. If you are cohabiting, here's what you should think about. You know, and they would sort of go through the research that it doesn't make for a happier marriage. And, you know, you're not really sharing your bank accounts yet, are you? And, you know, how are you going to negotiate these issues of trust that you've built up? You don't realize you've built up trust issues over the course of cohabiting for 3 years or something before you get married.
And sometimes it could push you into a bad marriage, right? If you share finances, buy a house together, all this stuff, and it's like kind of a natural conclusion. is to get married, but maybe you shouldn't.
But your judgment is shot.
Right.
You know,
right.
you're not, you never really decided.
Yeah.
You know, you
Right.
kind of glided into it,
Yeah.
and you've got all the chemical attachments going
Mhm.
on, all the hormonal bonding
Yeah.
going on.
Yeah.
You've never really had a chance to step back from it and say, oh, okay, I'm gonna live apart from him. We're gonna live
Yeah.
separately for at
Right.
least a month.
Right.
Do we still care about each other?
Right.
You know, do I still like this guy? You know,
Yeah.
and I have heard some priests insisting that cohabiting couples live separately.
Right.
You know,
Right.
and there's a lot of wisdom to that
Yeah.
because you know you've clouded your judgment quite a bit.
Right.
But those and then we have a chapter on pornography.
Yeah.
You know, if you've got a pornography issue, are you going to deal with it now, or are you going to wait till your 10-year-old walks in on you?
Right.
How about deal with it now, guys?
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
So, yeah, those are some of the things that
Yeah.
we talk about in there.
And do you talk about too, like maybe things to look for in terms of virtues or? I just interviewed this fascinating couple on Life on the Rock. They're like 35. They've been married 10 years. They got 5 kids, I think, and they were both from divorced homes.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and they worked on stuff though,
Yeah.
and I asked them, I said, was there a particular book? And they said, not so much a book. He said, our generation, we do YouTube videos.
Yeah.
But they talked about how that helped them, like in their communication, and like she was like an internal processor. So they'd get into an argument. He's kind of more outgoing, extrovert. He processes externally. Like he'll talk about a problem, and she's kind of being taken offense at things he's saying, but he's just trying to work through things. She likes to step back, come back later, and say, "This is what I
That's
think
interesting.
about." But it was a big piece for them just to be able to navigate conflict and stuff. And I just feel like, man, if it could save so much human pain and suffering, if couples could get this kind of stuff earlier and work through things.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think marriage that's our hope. The healthier marriage can be like the cell that it's just like can bring humanity together,
Right.
as a country and everything.
Right.
So
Right.
is just some maybe last thoughts about the like overcoming the sexual revolution. What are some of the things you say are the way out of this morass?
Well, I mean, there's stuff at the personal level
Mhm.
that people need to process and deal with themselves, and then there's all kind of sort of political and social stuff.
Yeah.
And you can't. Everybody has to do a little bit of both, right? Because it is in your lap, it is in your family, it is in your face,
Yeah. Right.
and so you have to have strategies for dealing with it at that level.
Right.
And for your Catholic audience, you got to stay close to the sacraments,
Right.
because there really is the demonic at work here. I mean, I just don't
Yeah.
think there's any doubt about that. So that's a big part of it. Inside your married life, inside your family life, there are a few magic words like, thank you, I'm sorry, I'm sorry I hurt you, I was wrong, I really appreciate you. Stuff like that. Anybody can do that. You don't have to be a genius to do that.
Right.
And so I do the basic stuff first.
Yeah.
But then as far as turning the culture around, it's just really important that you have a realistic picture of what's going on. I realize it feels like it's overwhelming and exhausting, and you want to hide under the rock. Life Under the Rock. That's your new show.
Hopefully we're not there yet.
No. Wait, what is under this rock? but no, you have to have some fortitude about the things, and we need to be telling the truth about it, So when you find somebody who's telling the truth, you got to support them and not freak out and back them up if somebody tries to cancel them.
Yeah. And you have that quality of a John the Baptist that you're going to say is truth. You're going to speak truth to power, call out Herod for his bad marriage or whatever. what gives you that? What keeps you motivated? I know you got a PhD in economics, right?
But that didn't do it.
You taught at Yale,
That
but
didn't do
it
it.
shows like
That has nothing to do with it.
it shows hard work
Well,
and
yeah, I'll give
toughness
you
there.
that. Well, honestly, besides the sacraments, you know, a big factor is my husband. You know, my husband's an engineer, not an economist, not a social, you know, but he's very conservative. He's a deeply honest man. He's not a Catholic, but he believes 100% in what I'm doing.
Right.
And because of him, and because of our kids, I gave up academic life.
Right.
In 1996. I left university life. If I was still in university, there's no way I'd be doing this. I mean, literally no way, you know. So the fact that he has supported me, continues to support me, I sometimes tell me, the only person I have to please is my husband. I really don't care what anybody else thinks. If he's mad, then that's a whole problem. That's a whole different kind of problem, you know. But really, that's really important for me. That's really important. If it weren't for him, I don't know what I'd be doing, you know. Because in academic life, you're under all sorts of pressures to conform.
Right.
I don't have any of that. I have to worry about that.
Right.
You know.
Let me ask you one more question.
Just one more question.
Yeah. What would you tell a young woman wants to get married, but like what you mentioned earlier, there might be full board career and all this and putting it off. How should she navigate that? How should she think about that?
Does she have a guy in mind already? I mean, there's decision trees all the way along. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So what I would say to her, and as a matter of fact, it's funny you asked me this, because when I started the Ruth Institute in 2008, this is what I thought I was going to talk about. I didn't mean to get involved in gay stuff. You know, that just kind of happened because Prop 8 landed in my lap in San Diego in 2008. But anyway, what I would say to her is, if you want to get married and have a family, you need to make that a priority. You need to have that in your mind. You need to let go of the attitude of, I'm not going to do anything about that whatsoever until, you know, you got to get that out of your mind and make it a priority that you're going to meet people and you're going to, you know, put yourself in a position where you can, you know, possibly meet people and stuff like that. And then once you are married, you know, you got to go for it. I mean, the fact is, your fertility will not be there forever. That's a fact. And many women have learned to their sorrow that they put it off too long. And there are statistics to this effect that the average woman across the West, if you ask them, how many children do you want to have? And then you ask them when they're 40, how many children did you end up with? They never have as many children as they wanted. It's a widespread tragedy that no one talks about, in my opinion. So I would tell you, go for it. Let her rip. You know, put your husband first. Put your husband first, and then the kids. Okay, you can't neglect your husband. I end up telling girls that all the time. You know, because when the babies come, you coo over the babies, and your husband's over there. Well, what about me? Where do you think that baby came from, girl? but no, that's an easy mistake to make. You know, it's an innocent mistake in a way, but you need to be conscious of it. And not neglect your love for your husband.
And you do hear that heartache from women that didn't go for it.
It's awful. It's awful, don't you think?
Yeah, definitely. I just wonder, like, your boots on the ground, and I mean, I hear it, I guess, in confessional work and stuff, but I imagine at your conferences, I'd like to, hear what their perspectives are. Because, you know, one thing I just come back to at the end of the day, if you have like a family, I mean, the parents are willing to sacrifice their career if it has to be for their, you know, the kids are like first there, you know. It's like, it's not like the job is more important than the kids, right? And it's like some reason people, I don't know, they can't see that in the beginning, that, I don't know, just the value of kids and what a comfort it is, especially later in life, you know, to have family.
Well, that's why the attack on the family is, it's not hyperbole to call it demonic, because the human person is meant for love. That's our real identity, right? Is to love and be loved. That's what everyone really wants. And so when the evil one can make that unattractive, or scare us, or freak us out, or make us think there's something more important than that, you know. He's doing very well for
Yeah.
himself with that. You know, that game's working for him.
Yeah. We're made for love. Marriage and family is like the primary locus there
That's right.
of loving and being loved. And I say too, I think for the woman, it's like her gifts and talents really come out
Oh,
raising kids and stuff. I mean, when people talk about their mothers and stuff, it's just like, I think Cardinal Mazzenti, this tough guy who was tortured, in Hungary in the 50s and stuff, he would speak about his mother in such terms. They were so beautiful. And I remember him saying one time, he said, as you get older, it's like it's even more of a mystery, and you rejoice, you marvel at it. I think that's the word. He said, you marvel even more the older you get about motherhood, the connection they have with children, what they do and stuff. And so I think the sexual revolution's, trying to tell women to be like man, and oftentimes like men in a fallen way even.
right,
Like
right. Men at their worst.
Yeah, men at their worst. Your gift package, you want it to thrive and blossom. I mean, yes, you can do all kinds of fields of work and use stuff there, but it's like especially the family.
Yeah.
You're just irreplaceable.
Yeah. Well, this has been a fun conversation,
Yeah,
Father
yeah.
Mark. I had no idea when you dragooned me after Mass what we're going to end up talking about.
I didn't either.
Well, let me just tell your listeners, if you're interested in what I've been talking about, just come on over and find us at ruthinstitute.org. And we've got, the report that we talked about, the 5, refuting the top 5 gay myths, you can get that just by downloading, it's a free download. You should be able to get it easily. And we have a very active YouTube channel and a podcast series. So, you can hear a lot of what we have to say. And I interview a lot of very interesting people on my podcast.
Right.
So thanks for having me.
And I'll just say, as a preacher too, I've stolen some of your stuff and
Is
phrases
that so?
and stuff. So yeah, I'm sometimes preaching something. I can't think of one now, but I remember you'll say things in a way that's helped me articulate it.
Oh, I'm glad.
So
I'm glad.
yeah.
Thank you. I'm glad. That's encouraging for me to know that, especially when the clergy are paying attention to what I'm doing,
Right.
So
Thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.